Hi guys, yasas que kalosirtate to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today we're making a classic Cretan recipe. Crete is the island that my family comes from, so these are near and dear to my heart because they take me way back to my childhood. We're making Hortopitakia. They're little hand pies that are filled with a variety of greens and herbs, and of course I'm adding feta, but traditionally feta is not added to them. But we add feta to everything. It's gonna make it more creamy and delicious. Let's get started. So we're gonna start off with making the dough, and the dough is so simple, just a few basic ingredients, and it's gonna make a light, airy, and crisp dough. You could use this dough to make any pie. So we're gonna add 1.5 cups of water, and if you do have a stand mixer, take it out and use it. It's gonna make life so easy. 1/2 cup of olive oil. 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of either lemon juice or vinegar. I'm using vinegar. You can use white or red wine vinegar, whichever one you prefer. And I'll just quickly give it a little mix. I have the dough hook attachment on, and then over here I have 4 cups of all-purpose flour. So I'm going to start kneading this on low or mixing it on low. Once the dough begins to come together, then I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes and let it knead for 5 minutes until a nice, smooth, and elastic dough is formed. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can definitely do this by hand. You might want to knead it a little bit longer. If it seems like it's too sticky, instead of adding too much flour, I don't suggest you add any more flour other than maybe 1/4 cup. What you're going to want to do if you're doing it by hand is to grease your hands with some oil and then knead it. So it's better to add some oil than flour because flour is going to create a very dry dough and you're not looking for that. So at this point, this is when I set the 5-minute timer, and once it's done, I'll show you what it looks like. So you're going to want to add a little bit of oil to the bowl that the dough is going to go in. And then transfer it into the bowl. It should be nice and stretchy, soft and elastic. It is still going to be a bit sticky. And go ahead and toss it in the oil so it's coated all around. You can even go ahead and form it into a ball. Cover it with plastic wrap and just let it rest for about 30 minutes or as long as it's going to take to make the filling. So for the green filling, we're going to start off with an onion, but you can use 2 or 3 leeks instead of the onion if you prefer those. I usually have onions on hand, so that's what I'm going to use. And I'm just going to finely chop it. So put a large pan over medium-high heat and add all of the onion to the pan with about 1/4 cup of olive oil and a little pinch of salt because we season every step of the way, every layer. If every layer is properly seasoned, it's going to be very flavorful. So that should take a few minutes, about 7-8 minutes for the onion to start softening. So now we're gonna prepare the greens. So this is a 1.5 bag of baby chard, baby spinach, and baby kale. It's been triple washed, so I'm not even gonna bother washing it. If you guys wanna wash it, that's fine. Your kitchen, your rules is what I like to say. So I have that's 1.5 pounds of that. And I also have 1 pound of baby spinach leaves that I'm gonna roughly chop. So you just need a very rough chop, nothing fancy here. Now the thing about the greens is you use the greens that are local to your area. That's how these little mini pies are usually made. So in Greece they have one of my favorite greens known as blita. I think it's called amaranth over here. It is impossible for me to find it. And then they also use a combination. They put a few bitter greens in there too because it just adds such a nice complexity of flavors. So that's why I got this bag because it has a little bit of everything in it. But again, use whatever you love, whatever is easy to find. You could even do it all spinach. So it would be 2.5 pounds of spinach leaves if that's what you wanted to use. Keep in mind if you're using something like dandelion greens, which tends to be a little bit more fibrous and tough, if you're not using baby greens like I am, a good thing to do before you chop them is to cook them a little bit. So bring a pot of water to a boil, add a little bit of salt to it, and then cook the greens until they soften. That's going to really save on the cooking time, and it's going to make them nice and tender. You don't want, hard greens that are uncooked in your pies. You want the filling to be nice and juicy and soft. So the mixed greens are ready. I'm going to roughly chop the spinach as well, and then we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so the next ingredient is green onions, also known as scallions. So these are kind of sad looking, you guys, because I bought them a few days ago thinking that I was going to do this video, a few days ago, and that just didn't happen. So we're just going to peel off all of the parts that look like, they're brown and dry or all mushy because you don't want to use them. And then I'm going to finally chop the rest. We waste nothing in this house, or at least we try not to. So the recipe calls for 3 or 4 scallions, but I'm using a few more because I've pretty much shaved off most of the greens, and I love scallions. So whenever you're chopping scallions, you want to have a bowl of water ready, cold water, to make sure that they're cleaned properly. And the scallions are going to go into the cool water. And then I'm just going to swish them around a little so any dirt that's stuck in between or inside of them will sink down to the bottom, and we'll have the clean scallions all the way on top. And then you just want to lift them out of the water. You never want to pour the water through a strainer because everything that fell down to the bottom that you don't want in your dish is going to end up back onto the scallion. So just lift them up and put them in a strainer and get rid of that excess liquid or water. Shake it off. And the onions are beginning to soften. I'm just going to add the scallions to this, and I'm going to cook them over medium-high heat again for about 3-4 minutes until everything is nice and soft. In the meantime, we're going to prepare the rest of the things that are going to go into the filling, which is a nice big bunch of parsley. I'm just going to shave off most of the leaves, and if some of the skinny stems get in, that's perfectly fine. Just going to finely chop them. You won't even know they're there. Parsley and mint add so much freshness. I'll just fish out some of those big stems. This is a lazy girl's way of cooking, you guys, but it works. Just roll everything up and finely chop it. And I'm just going to push this to the side. The parsley is done. And now I have a nice little bunch of mint. So mint stems are a little too tough to be chopped up and put into the dish. So I'm just going to pull all of the leaves off of here. And then gather all the leaves up and finally chop the mint too. So the herbs are ready. The last herb that's going to go in here is some dried dill that doesn't need any preparation work. So this is all ready. Once the onions are done, then we're going to add the greens to the pan. Okay, so the onions are all ready. They are going to continue to cook with the greens. Now I'm going to add a few handfuls of greens at a time. Once one bunch wilts down, then I'm going to add the next. And each time I add the greens, I'm going to season with a little pinch of salt. So like we said before, everything is nicely flavored. To save time and to prevent a lot of liquid from forming up from gathering into the pan, because greens do naturally contain lots of liquid. You don't want the mixture to be too watery. So what I'm going to do, I have a pan that's heating in the back with some olive oil. I'm going to wilt down the spinach in that one and the mixed greens with the onions in this one, and then we're going to mix everything all together. It's going to save time, and it's also going to prevent them from overcooking and things like that, because I don't think any pan is big enough to handle all of these greens. So it takes about 10 minutes to cook the greens down. The spinach wilts down in no time, probably 4 or 5 minutes, the whole pound of it. But these other greens take a little bit longer, and they do tend to release liquid. Try to dry it out as much as you can. That's why it's important to cook it over high heat, so that way that it can evaporate. The liquid can evaporate as the greens cook. I'm going to add the wilted spinach to the big pan. Turn the heat off. There's still going to be a little bit of liquid. You don't have to worry too much. Now we're going to add all of the herbs, the parsley and the mint. And the second they hit the pan, it just smells amazing in the house. I'm going to add a tablespoon of dried dill. If you have fresh dill, use about a 1/4 cup of finely chopped fresh dill. At this point, I'm also going to add some freshly cracked black pepper. Now, at this point, mix everything all together and taste them and see if it needs a little more seasoning, which would be more salt or pepper, or salt and pepper. And you can keep it vegan at this point, just like this. They are traditionally made without feta cheese, but if you are keeping it vegan, I would recommend that you add maybe the juice of half a lemon in here, and the zest too. You could add about a 1/4 teaspoon or half a teaspoon of zest, lemon zest. It really works well with greens, brightens them up, and goes well together. I won't be adding the lemon because I'm adding lots of feta. Smells so good. Now I buy block feta, so I cover a lot of behind the scenes stuff on Instagram in my stories. So follow me there to see what I'm working on, what's coming up, and I also give some recommendations because you guys DM me and you ask me lots of questions. So when it comes to feta cheese, sheep's milk feta is the best. It's creamy, it stays soft, and it's really so flavorful. But when I bake or fry, I go for the less expensive feta cheese, the cow's milk. You get more for your money, but just make sure that you buy it in block or chunk form and you crumble it yourself, because the already crumbled feta is just not good, you guys. We've covered this before, so I won't talk too much about it. Crumble the feta yourself. And there's no measurement to how much feta you want to put in here. It's totally up to you. Mix this all up, and I'm going to take this off the heat and wash my hands because I can't work with dirty hands. So now it's time to roll out the dough. You can definitely do it by hand with a rolling pin like they did, in the old days, and sometimes I still do it if I don't feel like taking this attachment out. But since I was using the mixer to make it, I might as well use this attachment. It comes with it, you buy it separately for the KitchenAid, but they also have ones that don't attach to a KitchenAid in case you don't have one. You can just kind of roll them out by hand. It makes life so easy. You just attach it on here and then you flour it well and pass the dough through just like we're gonna do. So I'm gonna cut the dough into 8 pieces. Let's just add some bench flour. If the dough is soft, that is a very good sign. So first, cut it in half. Cut each portion in half again, and one more time, and you'll have 8 portions. And just roll each portion into a little ball. And set it aside. And just keep them covered in plastic so that way they stay soft. Just loosely like that. So make sure you have lots of flour on your work surface and just press one ball of dough out into a rectangle. That looks good. And then we're going to keep it on the thickest setting so that way the dough doesn't get stuck. We're going to keep making the setting thinner and thinner as the dough passes through. So we're going to turn it on. Plug it in first. So each time it passes through, you want to just get it onto the flour so that way it never stays sticky, because once it sticks, then you're going to have a mess on your hands. Then you're going to have to stop, clean the little attachment, and it's just going to be more work than you need to do. So I pass it through 2 times on one, then I put it on number 2, which makes the dough a little bit thinner. Some flour onto that. I'll move it to 3 now. And then I'll just get it to 4 and pass it through one more time, and it should be ready. So I have a baking tray that's lined with parchment paper. You could put a kitchen towel on top of it too. That's how they do it traditionally in Greece. Sprinkle some flour on top of that. And now we're gonna work with the first sheet that we've rolled out. I'm gonna add a heaping teaspoonful of the dough towards the top right here, leaving a little bit of room in between, like 2 fingers. So try not to go too heavy with the spinach filling. What I tend to do in the beginning, I start to overfill them, and then I notice that I start to run out of filling towards the end, so then I go a little bit lighter. That's probably gonna happen to you too. Flatten it out a little bit. And then you're just gonna wanna very lightly brush the edges with water. This is gonna help them stick together. And in between as well, just a little. You don't want to add so much water that it's going to start to get gummy on you. Fold the bottom portion over. And then you're just going to get the air out, flatten them out a little bit, and get as much of the air out as possible, because that air in there, once it's trapped, when you start frying them, it's going to make these humongous air bubbles, and they're just going to be hard to manage in the frying pan. Then either with a cookie cutter, a cup, a bowl, anything you have, one of these little cutters, pastry cutters, just cut half moons all the way around. See how cute they are? And then carefully lift them and place them in the baking pan that's been prepared. And then we're just gonna keep on doing the same thing. Layla's gonna come in here and help me, and we're gonna get all of these formed and into the pan, and then it's gonna be time to fry them. So this leftover dough can just get gathered and re-rolled out later on. My mom used to fry this up and sprinkle some sugar on it afterwards. Wait, we need to get some flour on it.
Oh.
Otherwise, it's going to get sticky, right?
Yeah. Sticky, Vicky. Always icky.
Good. Here. She's got jokes.
As I always say.
What do you always say?
Sticky, icky. Is a Vicky.
Okay, get it on the flour and let's move it to 2.
Ooh. Long baby.
Here, you catch it. You catch it.
Good. Long baby.
What?
Long baby.
Okay, that's it. It's done. We did a good job. High five. So they're all ready. Now, once they're done, you just want to go in with a fork and poke a few holes on top, so that way when they're frying, whatever air is trapped in there and steam will escape and they won't pop on you or open or form those big bubbles. So this recipe does make a big batch of hand pies, over 40. We have about almost 50 actually here if I take the time out to count them. There's definitely 45. So the best thing about them is that they can be frozen. So at this point, you could just put the trays in the freezer if you're not making them right away. And once they harden, you could layer them on top of each other and wrap the trays tightly with plastic wrap or transfer them into freezer safe bags. And then you could freeze them, whenever you feel like having some. But if you don't feel like making hand pies and going through all of the work, it is a labor of love. It takes a little bit of time, but I promise you it is relaxing and it is fun to do, especially if you get your kids involved. But again, if you don't want to make the little hand pies, I'll put the instructions how to turn this into a 10-inch pie, it would be just like a spinach pie or something like that. You would roll out. First of all, you would cut the dough into 2 pieces and roll each one out as thin as possible, and then layer the bottom of the pan with one of the pieces of dough, brush some olive oil on top, put the filling on top of that, and then top it with the second piece of dough. And then you just bake it until it's nice and golden for about an hour or an hour and 20 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. But we're not doing that. We're gonna fry these. But before I do that, I'm gonna clean this area up, get a cast iron pan going with some oil in it until it's really nice and hot, about 360, 370 degrees Fahrenheit. But before I go there, I will say that once you start, if you're like me, you're gonna start making them a little bit on the smaller side and with more filling inside, and then it gets a little bit tiring and you end up making them bigger and bigger. I like the medium size, and I'll show you what I'm talking about, the medium size hand pie. The small ones are really good too, but the medium ones, just like the perfect amount, the perfect size to eat. Make them as big or as small as you want. I'm gonna clean up and then we're gonna get frying. Okay, so the oil is nice and hot. I'm using a light olive oil for frying, but you can use whatever your favorite frying oil is. So I'm gonna add them one at a time, and I'm also gonna make sure not to overcrowd the pan so that way they cook evenly. You wanna make sure that the oil is at least at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. 360 is even better. And we're gonna put them in here. I'm using a cast iron skillet because it really retains heat well, but you can deep fry these too if you'd like. So if they start to make big air pockets, you can go in and pop them so that way they cook evenly, and when you flip them over, they'll just cook better. We're gonna cook them all around about 2 minutes on each side, maybe 3 minutes until they're nice and golden. Do you see these little bubbles that the dough is forming once it fries? That means that the dough was perfectly made. There wasn't too much flour in it. If you add too much flour, it's going to be dry and the dough is not going to be light. These bubbles tell me that the dough is going to be really nice and light and airy. Once they're golden all around, go ahead and put them on a plate or on a tray that's lined with paper towels so it can absorb the excess heat, excess oil. And I'm going to keep frying a few more, and then we're going to go on and taste them. So I'm done frying these. If you want to bake them, baking is an option. They're just not going to be as light and crisp. I mean, you can set the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, brush these with olive oil or butter if you want a little bit more flavor, and then let them bake for about 25 minutes or so. I'll put the exact instructions to bake them in the blog post. If you have an air fryer, you can try it out in there, but honestly, the best way and the most authentic way to make these is to fry these. Eat them early on in the day and you'll be fine. They're just so delicious. If you're at least try frying them once just so that way you could see what they're supposed to taste like, and then you could bake them the rest of the way. It is time to do the taste test. The pastry is so flaky and light, has lots of bubbles in there, which makes it nice and airy. Just perfect and delicious. The filling is just so smooth and creamy because of the feta, aromatic because of all of those herbs. I think it's delicious. It would go even better with a nice side of tzatziki, which is the Greek cucumber dip, which if you want to learn how to make it, I'll post it in the annotations over here once this video is over. Now, there's lots of tips that go along with this, how to clean the pasta roller attachment, how to freeze them. I'll make sure that I'll put all of that on the blog post. Freezing them is simple, basically. You just let them harden and either transfer them into freezer-safe bags or you wrap the whole tray in plastic wrap and then thaw them out. It just takes a few minutes to thaw them out on a plate or on the counter, and then you go on and you fry them or bake them just the way we did. Thank you guys so much for spending time with me today. If you want all the exact measurements, they're on the blog, www.dimitrasdishes.com. I'll be back here with another delicious recipe worth sharing very soon. Yes, Ess?